Stuart Holman here with you again for our fifth and final daily devotional this week in our series on the covenant at Sinai, and particularly the 10 Commandments in Exodus 19 and 20. We're up to commandment number 4 today, so you know that we'll be finishing off the rest of the commandments in next week's devotionals. Now, at the risk of repetition, just a quick reminder that these 10 Commandments are not Israel's gateway to heaven. If they could just do them all, then God would save them and take them to heaven. No, in Exodus chapter 20, God has already saved Israel out of Egypt. These commandments are how they are to live in relationship with God as His chosen people, especially now that they are so soon supposed to be moving into their promised land. So this is how to live as God's people with Him in your midst. And it's very important that we keep that framework in mind. And just as the 10 Commandments were not the criteria for salvation for the people of Israel, they are not the standard to be met by the Christian for their salvation either. Instead, Jesus Christ came to completely fulfill the law, including the 10 Commandments and the prophets. He came to fulfill them all on our behalf before dying on the cross for our salvation. So why even bother with them at all today? Well, because they show us our need for a Saviour. Not only is our sin explicitly exposed, our sinful natures are actually excited by the possibility of disobeying the commands. So as Paul says in Romans 7, I would not have known what sin was had it not been for the law. For I would not have known what coveting really was if the law had not said, you shall not covet. So the law stirs our sinfulness and shows us our need of a Saviour. But the second reason is that the 10 Commandments also show us who our God is. God has not changed. His character is still revealed to us by them. The commandments show us what's important to God, and so they actually will guide us in honouring Him appropriately. By them, Christians can still learn something of how to live in relationship with our holy God, now that we are saved by Christ alone. So with this in mind, let's look at the fourth commandment. We're in Exodus chapter 20, beginning at verse 8. Remember the Sabbath day by keeping it holy. 6 days you shall labour and do all your work, but the seventh day is a Sabbath to the Lord your God. On it you shall not do any work, neither you nor your son or daughter, nor your male or female servant, nor your animals, nor any foreigner residing in your towns. For in 6 days the Lord made the heavens and the earth, the sea and all that is in them, but He rested on the seventh day. Therefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and made it holy. Sabbath, at its most basic, means to rest, to cease from work. For 1 day in 7, God's people are called to stop work and rest. Why? Well, it seems to me that there are at least three reasons to do this, not just for the ancient nation of Israel, but actually for the Christian as well. The first reason why we should stop work on the Sabbath is given directly in verse 11 there. So the first word in the verse 4 signals the explanation now that follows. We rest because God rested from His work of creation on the seventh day. In the context of Genesis 1 and 2, which is being quoted here, we're made in God's image. And so simplistically, we rest because God did. But moreover, there's something God-like in resting. Since we are God's stewards over all creation, we rest from work in His image, as He did. And just as we work in His image, cultivating and tending His creation. And so, as His image bearers, we copy God's pattern of work and rest. The second reason we should stop work on a Sabbath is because it is a gift from God. It's actually good for us, which is Jesus' point when He's arguing with the Pharisees about their Sabbath regulations in Mark chapter 2. Jesus said to them, the Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath. So the Sabbath rest, it's actually for our good. It's made for our enjoyment. not meant to be a burden. In resting from our work, we're restored, we are refreshed, and we're able to delight ourselves in the work that's been done. In resting from our work, we have an opportunity to enter into God's rest, to actually enjoy our relationship with Him and our relationships with our families and with our community, free from the obligations of work. So let's not get uptight and grumpy about Sabbath rest. It's interesting to me that even in this basic command, the Lord foresaw the need to close a few loopholes. Now, the particularly driven Israelite might say, "Oh, okay, well, as a devout believer in God, I won't work on the Sabbath, but I'll make sure that my servants and employees, my working animals and factories, keep on working, keep on being productive and making more profit for me." No, but as the command is given, there is a detailed explanation to protect the ones without power, the employees, the servants, the family members, and even animals. Which takes us to the third reason that Sabbath rest is something that Christians should practice. Sabbath is good for us, but it is also good for everyone else, especially those who do all the hard work, the sons and daughters, the male and female servants, the working animals, and the foreigners living among us. Elsewhere in Moses' laws, the principles of Sabbath are extended even to the use of land and environmental care in the context of farming, to the world of finance even, and lending and borrowing, and the year of Jubilee. The Sabbath allows everyone and everything renewal, restoration, and a resetting. Sabbath taking is also an exercise of faith. In a subsistence economy, of course, taking a day off risks your family going hungry. No work getting done? Well, there's no profit, there's no food. Even the Israelites wandering through the desert and living on manna had to learn the lesson of trusting God, that what they collected on the day before the Sabbath would be sufficient for that day and for the Sabbath day which followed. Similarly, the business owner today who closes their doors on a Sabbath must trust God for His provision, just as much now as then. Near where I work, there are 3 or 4 cafes that compete for business. For a while, one of them closed their doors on Sundays in order to Sabbath, to rest with family and with God. And on the other days of the week, I always tried to go to that particular cafe in preference to the others who stayed open on Sundays, just as a way of honouring that business owner's decision to rest. Which I later found out came from a position of Christian faith. Such an encouragement. And so in this culture in which we live, where we are so quick to find loopholes or just to plain ignore this command to Sabbath in relationship with God, I want to encourage us to revisit our Sabbath priorities. We Sabbath in God's image. We Sabbath to enjoy the good gifts of God, and we Sabbath for the good of all creation. I reckon that as Christians, these are pretty good reasons, compelling reasons, to build a Sabbath into our week every week. I don't think that it must be a particular day, a Saturday or a Sunday. It doesn't really matter. Now, as a church worker, my Sabbaths, well, I take it on Fridays. I've chosen that day just because it works well for me. What does matter, as opposed to the day of the week, what does matter is that we do Sabbath. Sabbath is not meant to be a guilt-driven burden, just as Jesus rebuked the Pharisees in his day. Instead, it is how we live well in relationship with God. We don't judge others for their practice, but we prioritise it for ourselves and for those we have responsibility for, whether it be our children, our employees, our farm animals, or people from other nations working in our midst. So let's rejoice in God's goodness on our Sabbath. Let's delight in His refreshment both in our homes and in our community and gathering with one another. Sabbath is a good gift from God, as well as Commandment number 6. So for your consideration, what is your plan for your weekly Sabbath? How can you delight yourself in God in your next Sabbath?